Everybody has a podcast. Comedians have podcasts, beekeepers have podcasts, pen lovers have podcasts. Shit, I had a podcast. Your mom and your dad probably have a podcast, and men who definitely shouldn't have a podcast have a podcast. Recording equipment is relatively affordable nowadays, and a bunch of people seem to have way too much time on their hands, which I suppose is what happens when you lay off or discharge roughly 1.6 million people in a single year. There's a lot of reasons why someone would start a podcast. Maybe you just want to hang out with your friends and create something to look back on for posterity's sake, or maybe you're interested in audio recording, or you're an expert in a certain field and you think your knowledge might be useful or interesting to somebody else. I, however, think there are far more nefarious and depressing reasons why people would start a podcast. The depressing part is just how brutal the job market is these days, where dropping off a resume or clicking the easy apply button on LinkedIn just doesn't suffice anymore. Many people have to be a fucking one-man band in the form of content creator, designer, marketing expert, media personality, and their own accountant. There are no more singular jobs anymore. You have to build a community and a platform just to get a foot in the door. According to a recent Vox article titled "Everyone's a Sellout," they touch on how musicians and artists have to sell out and be their own marketers and social media managers in place of the label or management team doing that stuff like, they used to. It's almost the norm and an accepted truth that you have to basically run a small business just to sell your book or album or get a manager or director level job. But it wasn't always like this. The nefarious part is that people treat them as a quick cash grab. Whether you're participating in the humanities or you're a scientist or electrical engineer, you probably have to be an influencer or content creator in order to leverage your abilities and create an advantage to promote yourself by starting something like a podcast. There are countless shows that serve only as a means to promote an individual's product, service, or expertise. Just look at how many fitness and financial and self-improvement podcasts there are. I don't want to suggest that all of these exist only for this purpose, but a lot of these people have courses and books and programs they're also trying to sell in tandem with their podcast, and it can feel a little cynical. Even if some of these shows are being made out of the genuine desire to talk about these people's passions, none of them should have to become a jack of all trades in order to do what they love just to get a bi-weekly paycheck. It's exhausting having to master another skill just to maybe get an interview. Others use it as a second or third revenue stream to supplement their other sources of income, like say being a YouTuber or actor or musician, but also a journalist or ex-Marine. So how did we get here? Why does everyone have a podcast? And when will it end? Be sure to check out my new podcast about it called Everything Wrong with What You're Currently Listening to Podcast. Speaking anecdotally, I started a podcast with some friends a few years back, sort of by accident. I had a D&D group and we never really had a regular schedule for getting together to play, and we'd go weeks between sessions. By the time we finalized a day to eat a bunch of snacks and play a fantasy RPG like 4 15-year-olds who'd stolen our parents' booze to drink while we were playing make-believe in the garage, no one could remember what happened in the campaign during the last session. The gameplay would come to a halt when someone would ask, "Who's this now?" when interacting with the BBEG of the story, which ironically dealt 2d10 psychic damage to them. Or when I'd have to look through my extensive inventory to find the stats for my Boots of Burrowing or the Hat of Vermin for my nasty rat wizard I was playing like some fucked up magical Willard. We ended up buying a microphone just to record the sessions so we could re-listen to it before starting another. Eventually, we bought more and more equipment that was getting used like once a month until we thought, hey, we think we're pretty funny, why not do this weekly? A thought a bunch of people have that is the catalyst for starting an entire podcast. No other thought goes into it. It was just a casual, fun thing to do as a way to schedule a consistent hang over Discord with each other, as it had gotten harder and harder to attend social activities as everyone started getting married and were working grown-up jobs, and also, there being a global pandemic happening at the time. Or still. I don't know. We're still in this, right? Not me, though. I'm single and loving it. Going to a show in your 30s where the opener doesn't start until 10 p.m. is rough when you have to wake up at like 7 a.m. Monday through Friday. I have a bone to pick, by the way, with shows starting at 10 o'clock. Anything later than 7 is criminal. Who's doing that? Over the 2 years or so of doing a podcast, we all learned something about audio mixing, video recording, editing, graphic design, and all the different intricacies of analytics and marketing, and the industry as a whole. It was cool and fun learning these new skills and equipment that have been invaluable to me here on YouTube. Honestly, I'm glad I did a podcast before jumping over to YouTube because no one watched or listened to those early episodes, and now I don't really cringe at any of the videos I've made on my own because of the experience of stumbling through a podcast. Unfortunately, it's a shitload of work that doesn't come with the same benefits of uploading a video to a platform like YouTube or TikTok. Here, the algorithm will send your videos to hundreds of thousands or even millions of people without any promotion or input from you. For better or worse. It's why every podcast is now a video podcast as well that utilizes an algorithm from another platform. Without the help of third-party platforms and their built-in community sections to promote, you're just sort of throwing an hour-long audio recording into the Apple podcast ether, hoping someone stumbles upon it or hears about it through the grapevine or your audience advocates for you. Especially if you don't have a pre-existing fan base. I know that there are podcatching platforms that incorporate some form of promotional tools, but for the average podcaster, you're just uploading praying to the Lord of viral content for something to pop off. Building a podcast audience takes years if you're just some random person or group of friends. If you're lucky and were a podcasting early adopter, you've probably become a big name in the industry, but even Joe Rogan's early episodes are just him sitting in his dimly lit apartment fit for a Mountain Dew drinking, wall punching frat bro.
Did you see that guy accidentally hit that moose with his car?
Now, big names just rent fully equipped studios and hit #1 on the charts within weeks. To me, podcasts were always a dorky thing for computer science nerds. I never really gave it much thought as I was still in high school when all this was happening and was skateboarding and trying to get laid and going to punk shows that started at 10 p.m. because I was still a virile young man, not the decrepit old you see before you now. From my recollection, it was a niche thing that I didn't really understand, where people I'd never heard of were using it as just another form of journalism. There was a bunch of old people talking about something probably super boring, which looking back was a good thing because it wasn't the podcasting landscape it is today, where uber famous and sometimes terrible people have infiltrated the service and now overshadow smaller creators. It's extremely competitive now, where any big name celebrity can come in and dominate while everyone else is left struggling to get listens, and it sucks. I love Conan O'Brien, but when he entered the space, I was a little disappointed. Podcasting originally provided an advantage for those outside the entertainment industry who lacked access to traditional ways of breaking into the field. These celebrities have the connections and money to buy the newest and best and most expensive equipment, recording studios, and very little, if any, need to self-promote. The podcasting landscape is already extremely saturated, and the more Conan O'Briens and Jason Batemans enter the space, the more they pull attention away from those who don't have the same name recognition or $2,000 to drop on 4 SM7Bs. And at the same time, it feels like everyone from Twitch streamers to improv comics to lawyers and psychologists have to have one as a way to market and advertise their product or their service. Platforms tend to prioritize these bigger names, continuing the cycle of celebrities monopolizing the space, which only accelerates the commercialization of podcasting. It's why the first 10 to 15 minutes of any show is now dedicated to a dozen ad reads for MeUndies and Squarespace and Dr. Squatch before you get to any kind of actual entertainment or information. There was an authenticity to early podcasts, which is completely lacking in some of the bigger shows that exist now. If you don't have the name recognition, you could always go the shock value route. No-name weirdos can become successful podcasters by creating shows that rely solely on drama and hot takes. I've never listened to the Fresh and Fit podcast or Flagrant, except for when I did a whole video about Andrew Schultz being a woman-hating maniac. But the clips I've seen on TikTok are usually gotcha moments where the hosts dunk on their guests or bicker and talk shit about other podcasts. Sensationalism is a sweet, sweet drug for the masses, and it's the same tactics used by pre-internet tabloids you'd see at the grocery store checkout that speculated on celebrity relationships and bizarre conspiracy theories and Bat Boy. There's just no depth to this kind of content, and it's only engaging on a surface level meant to incite outrage from the listener. It doesn't contribute anything meaningful to any conversation because the conversation is hollow and wretched.
As a man, if
Outrage bait like this activates our fight or flight response and is extremely addictive because we are all extremely opinionated and have our own thoughts and feelings about the behaviors of others. We'd rather comment and consume the drama of strangers rather than deal with the drama in our own lives as a way to deflect. And because of these strong feelings we have towards outrage bait content and drama, it creates a powerful bonding experience with other fans and the performers themselves that reinforces ideology without challenging it. Speaking of craven behavior, the whole industry at this point is starting to feel like an excuse to try and make some money, and there's nothing exactly wrong with that. Times are tough and people gotta subsidize their income where they can. But there are a lot of people exploiting the system and churning out shows that are completely directionless, boring, repetitive, and cynical that exist just to sell bondage gear.
Do not come.
Oh, and they're way too fucking long. 45 minutes to an hour is plenty. There's no way I'm listening or watching 2 hours of an unedited hang sesh with some moron spouting conspiracy theories and misinformation that's riddled with ads for Helix Mattress and Warby Parker. I personally have a bit of podcast fatigue due to just how many shows there are. It's like going to the cereal aisle in a grocery store looking for Cap'n Crunch, only to see 100 variations of dehydrated sugar bread pressed into the shape of berries and Draculas and the Celtic pagan Lucky Charms runes? What are these supposed to be? And they say capitalism breeds innovation. Every podcast is now an interview show hosted by a multi-millionaire celebrity interviewing a multi-millionaire celebrity, or people just reading "Am I the Asshole" Reddit threads, or half a dozen misogynists body-shaming women and whatever Ben Shapiro is yammering on about.
Let's look at the stats. I've got the facts. My money like this, so my pockets are fat.
And this is where the joke about how I need to take recording away from men started, because they abuse the ability to heave every fucked up thought out onto the internet with little repercussions, and then turn around and cash that check from Manscaped. Ooh, it's really windy out there. Not every man needs or should have a podcast, myself included. And I would go so far as to say this sentiment doesn't exclusively apply to men, as I've seen several clips on TikTok of women also being the most insufferable podcast hosts.
Guys who are like too good at sex kind of gives me an ick.
Now, I get that the majority of podcasts are hosted by men, so we're an easy and valid target to make fun of for thinking we're some gift from God and have something of value to say that others will want to hear. But also because most men's podcasts seem to be alpha male grind set get rich quick financial shows that are basically a front for some fraudulent scam or pyramid scheme. I could be wrong, but the amount of Gen Z men heading down the alt-right pipeline like a Schlitterbahn water slide spewing the same brain-dead talking points you see on Good Bro, Bad Bro make me think I'm probably not that far off base.
I would argue it doesn't take as much effort as it does for a man to do the same thing. Because a man has to resist the earth with gravity when he lifts weights.
I didn't do any research on this, mainly because I'm not gonna waste hours of my life listening to this shit. So, sorry, my research only goes so far. My patience also. To be fair, while there are extremely toxic, classist, misogynistic, and straight up racist podcasts, there's also a lot of positives to hosting or listening to one. Not racist podcasts, just podcasts in general. There are a bounty of educational shows that can teach you about history, science, philosophy, and so on. I think one of the reasons such educational podcasts have exploded as a form of casual entertainment is because, one, human beings are naturally curious and we might randomly think about, I don't know, chameleons and what their whole deal is, and then stumble upon the Chameleon Breeder podcast. And two, there are tons of things about life that we never learned in high school or college. Why was I forced to learn algebra that I've literally never used in real life, and not how to do my taxes, or that I can get lizard insurance for my chameleon? Podcasts offer an alternative to traditional education where you can tune into some random show as a way to fill in some of those knowledge gaps. And before anybody freaks out, I'm not suggesting you'll get a PhD listening to a bunch of episodes of This American Life, just that they can be, supplementary. There's a lot to be gained by listening to educational content as entertainment, and you shouldn't gatekeep like this freak who thinks learning shouldn't be fun. This criticism of the shortification of learning through podcasts and other content is so frustrating and myopic, and the same thing as when your pedantic brother-in-law says that listening to an audiobook isn't reading. Shut up, Gerald. While it's clear that not all content labeled as educational on social media is going to be deeply informative, entertainment like this is a powerful tool for learning. The critique of such content as mere entertainment misses the point. Learning can and often should be fun, because why do something you hate? The notion that learning must be a strenuous effort like going to the gym is outdated and fails to acknowledge the diverse ways in which people absorb and retain information. The podcasting world, much like other media platforms, is a testament to the human capacity for curiosity and the desire to learn in a way that conveniently fits into our daily lives, regardless of how passive it is. Podcasts offer a variety of knowledge across various subjects, and we have to recognize that the human brain responds to narratives and storytelling, and when information is presented in a compelling and engaging format, it can actually enhance learning. This isn't to say that all learning should be fun in the traditional sense, just ask any organic chemistry student, but it shouldn't be dismissed if it is. The joy of discovering something new, understanding a complex concept through analogy or metaphor, or coming to a revelation while listening to a podcast shouldn't be undervalued. These educational podcasts can democratize knowledge and often provide access to information and expert insights that might otherwise be locked within the halls of academia or industry. Even if you're not retaining everything you heard on a podcast about, I don't know, quantum physics, for example, it might at the very least drive you to take a more formal approach to learning about how light acts as both a particle and a wave. What? Sounds crazy. Podcasting can also be a safe space to experiment with performing or creative writing. One of my favorite podcasts several years ago was Welcome to Night Vale, which was sort of like a throwback to old radio plays of the 30s and 40s. It tells the story of a creepy Lovecraftian town that's haunted by faceless old women, demonic beagle puppies, deer-headed deities, and the glow cloud. Podcasts like Off Book and pretty much any D&D actual play are great examples of podcasting as a place to stretch your creative muscles in a room with maybe one or two other people that are typically your friends without the worry of ridicule. Instead of getting on stage and acting out an actual nightmare that I think everyone has had, performing unprepared in front of an audience, you can fuck around in your spare room, and if it sucks, you just trash that shit. No one has to hear anything you don't want them to with a podcast. When I was doing mine, there were a couple of episodes that we deleted almost immediately after recording because you could just tell it was garbage. You're able to test things out and fail without criticism. Unfortunately, millions of people think they've got that X factor, something no one else has thought of, or think they're just the funniest person on the planet because they can recite The Office quotes verbatim. You're not funny if you're just regurgitating pop culture references like a human parrot. The one thing I learned a lot from podcasting was how to be a better active listener and learning how to turn it on even if I was having a terrible day. Hosting a podcast is not as casual an activity as some might think. You still have to perform to a degree and be able to carry a conversation or bring a unique perspective to a topic and have something witty or insightful to offer. You can't hum and haw your way through a thought when there's a microphone in front of your face, otherwise you're gonna bore, annoy, or anger whoever might be listening. Even some of my favorite podcasts that are hosted by professional comedians and performers annoy me in some parts because they've gotten so comfortable doing 600 plus episodes that it's basically a 9 to 5 for them now. The spark and joy and excitement seems to dissipate around the 300 episode mark. Or it's like listening to two or more strangers have a conversation in another language because it's just inside jokes and callbacks and shorthand that I don't have the time or patience to go back and listen to all 10,000 hours of their back catalog in order to understand. I've switched off multiple episodes of shows I'm a fan of because it devolves into 4 people talking over each other in an attempt to get their joke or thought out, and it ends up sounding like walking into a bar that's just been recently renovated in a gentrified neighborhood that sells Olympia for $12 is packed wall to wall with tech bros babbling incoherently. These people have been in movies and TV who are professional performers by all accounts, and yet they seem to have an inability to shut the fuck up for 10 seconds in order for their co-host to finish a thought. What are we doing? How? There are countless shows I'd love to listen to, but god damn, is it difficult to bring myself to start at episode 1 of 500, where I'll be trying to decipher who is saying what 50% of the time, like some CIA spook decoding a secret recording that was taken using a covert listening device planted under a diplomat's desk. It shouldn't be that much work to listen to a podcast. Podcast fatigue seems to stem from the medium's growing prevalence as listeners constantly uncover and share long-standing favorites, creating an overwhelming array of choices. This saturation makes individual podcasts feel less unique. The more podcasts there are, the less special any one of them becomes. I'd be more interested in evergreen content and limited series podcasts that focus on a single topic over a set number of episodes that don't suffer trends or current events. I'm also fatigued by celebrities using podcasts to nostalgically discuss the good old days, wax philosophical about comedy as an art form, or flaunt their wealth and status, whether it's intentional or not. Just look how fans have turned on Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura in the last year or two for this very reason. The facade of celebrities portraying themselves as normal has lost its appeal, if there ever was one. It's not normal that part of your job is going on countless podcasts year-round where you talk about nothing, or shill your podcast branded vodka while clearly not addressing your own alcoholism and stumbling onto the set of another podcast and making an ass of yourself. I could watch an episode of Seinfeld if I wanted a show about nothing. How many interviews do you really need to do when they all cover the same story that you tell in exactly the same way? Content like this and the superficial nature of celebrity interviews, which are often filled with repetitive stories and gimmicks and games, has led to a longing for more genuine and varied content. Beyond the superficiality often seen in episodes of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Leave the lowest common denominator content for him. He seems to really love it. And while there is a cottage industry of podcasts being made from someone's home office or garage out of a genuine interest and love of podcasting who rely on advertising and sponsorships, there's also the podcast industrial complex with networks that act like major record labels in the music industry. These networks can bring a certain level of professionalism and polish to podcasting that was previously unheard of by equipping creators with the tools they need to produce, market, and monetize their content. These networks ensure, to a degree, that podcasts under their umbrella stand out in an increasingly crowded market. That is, unless they're run by Colin Thompson, who stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from creators like Theo Von, Whitney Cummings, and Tony Hawk. Beyond defrauding podcasters, there's also a risk that podcasts might start sounding similar, losing the unique voice and tone that made them so appealing in the first place. It's a delicate balance between elevating the quality of podcasts and maintaining the diverse, eclectic nature that has been a hallmark of the medium. This all affects listener engagement and community building and how creators cut through the noise. Podcasters have to turn to social media to reach more people by using every platform on earth to deepen their relationship with listeners, which itself can be just a lot of work and require employing more and more staff you have to pay using unreliable sponsorships where you're not guaranteed to not get ripped off. I feel like podcasting has lost a lot of its initial charm by transforming from an innovative and quirky medium to an overwhelming wave of samey content. I'm so tired of being recommended video podcasts on YouTube and random shows in my Spotify feed. I swear to God, every influencer woke up collectively one day and decided to start a podcast. They've replaced those old 80s and 90s instructional VHS tapes that were all made so people like Jackie Stallone could capitalize on her famous son's name. And just like the glut of those same VHS tapes, podcasts have become increasingly challenging to sift through the ever-growing sea of shows, particularly with the rise of minor drama involving B and C tier celebrities and creators. I find this kind of drama chasing nauseating and irritating, like the never-ending controversies surrounding hosts like Ethan Klein and Trisha Paytas. I hate that I even know about those two. These podcasts are basically audiobook tabloid journalism, where every time someone has a bad experience, they have to clap back on another podcast, and it becomes this well of vacuous, obtuse content they keep returning to for weeks on end, and I'm so bored by all of it. The proliferation of mundane, unoriginal, toxic rage bait shows has led to a situation where hosts overestimate the impact of their work, comparing it to monumental achievements as though they're splitting the atom. While the best podcasts contribute valuable insights or spotlight under-discussed issues, others merely serve as background noise to clean or cook to, and the worst are those that serve only the purpose of fostering toxic parasocial relationships with audiences who are chronically online. And all the cons to podcasts are starting to outweigh the pros. We're now in a situation where the future of podcasting feels uncertain and cynical, with signs pointing towards an impending adjustment period, to put it mildly. The current model, being heavily reliant on advertising revenue, makes me question the long-term viability of the industry. The initial novelty of podcasting attracted people who wanted to dabble in performing and writing, and advertisers looking to tap into new demographics. But with a market so saturated with garbage, there's a risk that not only advertisers will withdraw, but audiences as well, leaving many of the good ones without a sustainable way to pay for their chameleon insurance premiums. Do you want this chameleon dead, Rob Lowe? Do you? Because you're gonna kill this chameleon. That's the video. Thanks so much for watching. And if you made it this far, that means you're special, but you probably already know that. Be sure you like and share and subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell a stranger. You can also go to my Instagram and follow me there, where I post updates about the channel and my life. You can also now become a member right here on YouTube. On the main channel page, there's a join link. It's $3 and $5. You can pick your tier. They each come with their own perks and things like that. So if you have a couple bucks to, support me, to pay for equipment and, other stuff, that would be great. If not, no big deal. If you do join, you can cancel anytime. Thank you so much again, and vanish.